After playing some co-op games with some friends, I couldn't help but think, whatever happened to co-op games these days? You look at games like Payday, Warframe, Division, and even Destiny, they tend to kind of play the same in terms of how you do it day in and day out. You go in, you do a mission, maybe get some better loot, and repeat. The formula itself ain't exactly wrong to have in these games, but it makes me wonder, what happened to the story-based co-op games? A Way Out seems to be taking its co-op to a whole new level that would have you experience being in jail together and finding some pretty quirky ways to escape in a movie-like fashion, which I admit is something I haven't really been seeing a lot before. The game always being in split screen lets you experience what each player is doing and allows the story to progress without you technically being there yourself. You could just see it through the other side's perspective. Sure, there's no loot grinding, no dungeons to go through, you're not robbing banks or surviving the apocalypse, you're just experiencing a story, and that's the main part that I feel has been lacking in co-op games. For the most part, gameplay has seen an all-time high. You and your friends can get together and play a few rounds of whatever horde mode shooter you prefer and have a blast. Other games like Wildlands have you roam an entire map completely independent of each other, giving you complete freedom for the most part. But really, for most of these games, that's pretty much all the depth you'll get. Most of them rarely give you a good reason to support the things you end up doing. Even newer games like Fortnite are just pure gameplay. I mean, sure, there's nothing wrong with that, people can play whatever they want. But to have this lack of a story-driven experience, even slightly, is honestly quite surprising. But maybe it's because it hasn't really gone that well in the past. The biggest game I could remember that changed because of its co-op had to be Dead Space, where before having it be a solo corridor horror game, where you would be wary about all the ammo that you've been spending and what would pop out of nowhere, suddenly became a walk in the park with you and your friend able to craft ammo and for the most part have no issues beating the game, even on harder difficulties at times. In fact, the one mode that I remember having trouble with when I played it was the one life game mode, the hardest one. And in fact, the only hard part about it was the sequences where you could just get killed in one hit, and that's it. But it goes to show that depending on the game and the tone, co-op can completely change that. Especially if the addition of the co-op is kinda completely pointless. Army of Two has the best example for the complete opposite. In Army of Two, co-op was kind of the main highlight of the game. Sure, you could play it solo, as you could with any of these games, but it wouldn't really be the same. These guys weren't just your average military type personas, at least not yet. These characters have an actual relationship that can change based on the actions you and your buddy take throughout the story. Sure, it was a simple button press, but those types of actions would carry over and even change the outcome of the story. It's more about what those supposed insignificant actions meant than how complex the system worked. Slap on the head for stealing a kill or a simple fist bump for a good strategy working out can make quite a difference in their friendship. They can end up betraying each other or being good friends by the end. Even Resident Evil Raccoon City, despite its flaws, had something similar to this, giving players a choice that would pit them against each other. And that's something you don't see a lot, acknowledging that the other players are characters too. They have personalities, they can affect the story as much as the frontline character. They can have separate choices that the other ones can't. That kind of sounds way more interesting to me personally than just having a bunch of no-name guys having a job to do. Yeah, I like the fact that even in COD Zombies, the characters actually talk to each other about what they're doing and actually give them some development as the game goes on.
German, I will keep asking until I get an answer. What are we doing here?
Putting things right, Nikolai. Putting things right.
Your words are empty. Your soul is hollow. How could you ever hope to put things right?
Nikolai, I realize that I'm often hostile towards you. It's simply because your ideology is diametrically opposed to mine.
While in Wildlands, they try to do the same thing, but have the ghosts just end up making jokes a majority of the time.
Tell me if you've heard this one. A sailor sitting in a bar. I've heard this one. I don't give a shit. Anyway, this sailor's sitting at a bar and he leans over to the guy next to him and says, "You want to hear a marine joke?" The guy next to him replies, "Before you tell the joke, you ought to know. I'm 6 feet tall, weigh 200 pounds, and I'm a Marine. The guy next to me is 6'2", weighs 225, and is also a Marine. And the guy next to him, he's 6'5", weighs 250, and is a Marine too. Now he says, do you still want to tell that joke? The sailor thinks about it for a minute, then shakes his head. Nah, he says, I don't want to have to explain it 3 times.
There's no conflict or anything. They don't develop as characters at all, and kind of undermines the whole serious tone of the story. I mean, we got all these good games with great gameplay and loot systems, but why is it that we can't go beyond that? Is it because that's all we like, having characters with little explanation and a bunch of loot to go out and get? Or is there something more to it? Is this weird place we're in where, yeah, the gameplay has gotten way better, giving us a lot more freedom, but we had to lose something to kind of get that. These games kind of live and die by the stuff you and your friends can do. I mean, I remember all the good memories I had trying to decipher the COD's storyline with all of its unique and memorable characters and lines of dialogue. It brought a lot of good moments. But I can't really say that about Wildlands, Dying Light, Assassin's Creed Unity, or Watch Dogs. I could go on with all the characters and games that really had no significant impact, where the characters you play as well as most of the supporting cast, kinda don't matter at all. I mean, I'm gonna be honest here, I could care less about 90% of the characters these games had. The Division, I can barely remember their names. Dying Light, there's a few good characters, but they kinda just fade into the background and aren't really important to the overall game. They get into some messy situations just to give players a reason to go out and do something that feels important. And that's kinda what these characters are at the end of the day. They're not there to do anything besides give out quests and occasionally need your help. Even the one character that's a badass eventually will need your help or even be put out of commission early on. It's all kind of to give you and your group this sense of importance, that you're the only guys for the job, even though you're kind of a group of overhyped errand boys. Now of course there's a lot to do in these games, I'm not gonna knock that, but there's a sort of emptiness to it. The story and characters kind of get muted with the intense gameplay that you and your friends have, and this is something I particularly noticed in The Division. There's this huge virus going on, a lot of people are dying, it's super serious, yet the whole time we're just cracking jokes and not really paying attention to it. The game never really separates the serious tone of the game story with just how fun and grindy the game is in reality. The same thing happens in Dying Light, where the heavy atmosphere can sort of make you take your time and act cautiously when you're alone, but when you have an entire group of cranes running around, the game kind of switches focus and becomes this way more action-oriented game because you have nothing to worry about anymore. In fact, even death becomes kind of like this thing that doesn't really matter in the game. And you know, I say 4 cranes because, you know, the other characters have no story for existing. They're literally just clones of the main character. Yeah, and why waste time writing actual interesting characters when we can kind of just let them all be the same guy? Kind of like Dead Rising, but without the character actually being interesting. Maybe we have gotten overdue for a game like A Way Out. It seems like it's gonna be a change of pace for these type of games. Maybe we could get a sort of resurgence of games that not only have good gameplay with friends, but a story that doesn't get overshadowed by just how goofy and random the co-op gameplay can get. Now don't get me wrong, I don't mind the current type of co-op games out there. In fact, if you couldn't tell, I actually play them a lot. It's the experiences you get with friends that make them so much fun at times. If they were that bad, I wouldn't be playing them or people wouldn't be buying them. But that doesn't mean I can't also feel that more narrative-focused games that can actually take co-op and make it something more grounded than it actually is shouldn't be encouraged more. I hope that we will get more games that can flesh out the idea of a co-op game to be more than just a looter shooter, and maybe have more interesting worlds and characters that can truly make the experience unique.